Rick, over to you.
Hey, can I share my screen here?
You should be able to.
Okay. Everyone see that?
Yes.
Okay. Sorry, so real quick, I think I'll probably need about an hour and 15 minutes to get through this. There's 94 slides. I don't want to push it off for 2 weeks as I may not be here. So if it's okay with you, if I go just a little bit longer, if you guys need to go, you're more than welcome to, but I'll try and hurry through these. But we're going to talk about the sealed portion of the Book of Mormon, a subject that I've been studying for the last couple of years. And I just wanted to kind of present some of my findings with you. So tonight's outline is going to be threefold.
Rick, before you get going too much, when we're back in New York, we'll look for those for you, okay?
All right. I appreciate that. So tonight's outline we'll cover three things. Number one, what is the history, sealed portion of the Book of Mormon? 2, what is contained in it? And 3, when will we get to read it? Questions 2 or 3 are pretty straightforward. Those should be answered pretty quickly, but let's start with the history of the sealed portion. So, question for you guys, where does the story of the Book of Mormon's sealed portion start? What prophet does it start with? Anyone know?
Moroni?
No. Good guess. Any other guesses? All right, so the sealed portion of the Book of Mormon. Oh, we got another guess?
Omni.
Not quite. The brother Jared. So you guys are all familiar with the story of the brother Jared. And here the Lord, parts the veil and, touches the 16 stones for the brother Jared. We're all familiar with that story. And right after this is kind of where the sealed portion of the Book of Mormon kicks off. So in verse 25 of Ether, chapter 3, we read, "The Lord showed unto the brother Jared all the inhabitants of the earth which had been, and also all that would be, and he withheld them not from his sight, even unto the ends of the earth." So the brother Jared got to see this. In addition to seeing the Lord, he also got to see this vision where he sees all the inhabitants of the earth from the beginning to the end. Orson Pratt said this about this vision. He said, "The Lord showed the brother of Jared all the children of men previous to his day, and all that were on the earth at the time he lived, and all that would be to the end of time. How long do you suppose it would take a man to see all who had ever lived, if he only employed 1 second to look at each individual? If he had looked at each individual, all of the generations, for 1 second successively, it would have taken him over 3,000 years to have beheld them all. There must be some faculty or power natural to God and to superior beings that man in this life is not in possession of in any great degree, by which they can look at a great variety of objects at once. The brother Jared could look upon past, present, and future generations. They all came before him, and he gazed upon them all. There was not a soul that he did not behold." So kind of interesting quote, but in other words, the brother Jared saw the entire history of the world from the fall of Adam to the end of the millennium. So what is contained in the sealed portion of the Book of Mormon? Well, we're going to hear in a minute, the Lord's going to command brother Jared to write this down, seal it up, and so the sealed portion of the Book of Mormon contains the brother Jared's vision that he saw in the whole history of the world. Pretty exciting. According to Nephi, "It shall come to pass that the Lord God shall bring forth unto you the words of a book, and behold, the book shall be sealed, and in the book shall be a revelation from God, from the beginning of the world to the ending thereof." So before we move on, is there any question as to what is contained in the Book of Mormon? I think it's pretty straightforward, but go ahead.
How would you compare it to the vision of John, the Revelator on Patmos?
Well, John probably saw a lot of that too. We only have what John gave us, but I think what we will have from the brother Jared is a lot more, a lot bigger record, larger record, and is kind of what I gather. So probably a lot more detail and probably a lot less symbols, probably a lot more straightforward.
Hey, Rick, didn't Moses and Abraham also have similar visions?
Yeah. The brother Jared's not unique to a lot of these prophets that have seen the history of the world. But what is unique about him is he got to write it down. And so, and in fact, here, this is what the Lord said. The Lord said unto him, write these things and seal them up, and I will show them unto mine own due time unto the children of men. So the brother Jared wrote them, and eventually they ended up in the hands of Moroni. Moroni said, behold, I, Moroni, have written upon these plates, meaning the gold plates, the various things which the brother of Jared saw. And the Lord commanded me that I should seal them up. So, yeah.
Hey, Rick.
Yeah.
This is Dave. I just want to interrupt. So I really wasn't that wrong when I said Moroni.
No, that's not where it starts there, Davey.
Okay. Just want to, all right.
That's where it ends, right? But very good. So yeah, it doesn't end up in the hands of Moroni, and he seals them up, puts them in the gold plates, and the rest is history.
So don't you think that is a Moroni summary, just like the Book of Mormon?
Well, no, and I'll explain what I believe it to be here in a minute, but that's a good question. Hopefully I'll answer that. If not, let me know towards the end. So how did Moroni end up with the brother Jared's record? So that's kind of what we're going to try and piece together tonight. So before we can answer this question, we need to kind of start from the beginning with the brother Jared, and we also have to learn about a sacred device that was associated with the record. They were to go hand in hand, and that's the two stones. So while the brother Jared was on the mount, the Lord said unto him in Ether 3, behold, these two stones will I give unto thee, and ye shall seal them up also with the things which ye shall write. So where did these two stones come from?
Weren't they part of the 16?
They were not.
They weren't. Okay.
No, not. I don't believe so. I underlined the answer here.
Came from the Lord?
It came from the Lord. The Lord gave them unto the brother Jared. They were not the brother Jared's stones that he asked the Lord to touch. After he touched the 16 stones, the Lord gave him these two stones that were sacred, and he asked the brother Jared to seal them up with the record that the brother Jared would write. So,
are they, Rick? Are they part of the Urim and Thummim?
They are, yeah. The interpreters, Urim and Thummim, spectacles, all things used to describe these two stones. Yeah. So look at Ether 3. Verse 23, behold, these two stones will I give unto thee, and ye shall seal them up also with the things which ye shall write. So if you guys can remember one thing from my presentation here, it's that these two stones were to remain with the brother Jared's record at all times. That's extremely important to my arguments the rest of the night. And it says it right there. The Lord wanted the brother Jared to seal up the stones with the record. Why? Does anyone know? The Lord answered that in verse 24, for behold, the language which ye shall write, I have confounded. Wherefore I will cause in mine own due time that these stones shall magnify to the eyes of men the things which ye shall write. So what was the purpose of these two stones?
To be able to translate his writings to our current language.
Yep. They were used for translating the record. So what would happen if the interpreters ever got separated from the brother Jared's record? We have a useless record, don't we? We can't translate it.
Vain, there would be no record.
Exactly. So that is why the Lord.
But we have iPhones now.
That's true.
They're kind of like a stone.
They are a lot of similarities, I think, personally. But yeah, it's important to remember that these two stones were to remain with the brother Jared's record at all times. They're sealed together. The Lord told him, seal these with the record. Because they're going to be used for translating this record later on.
So now you said those are part of the Urim and Thummim, or are these separate in addition to the Urim and Thummim?
No. So when Joseph Smith received these, they came with a breastplate. They were struck by the similarities of that and the Urim and Thummim described in the Old Testament. So they started calling it the Urim and Thummim. Joseph Smith originally called them the spectacles. And then once he translated the Book of Mormon and learned that the Nephites called them interpreters, he started calling them interpreters. But they also were known as Urim and Thummim as well, but they were not the same Urim and Thummim as in the Bible. These were a separate device and used for separate purposes too. Similar but different. Enough similarities that they kind of had the name associated with each other. So how long was the brother of Jared's record remain sealed? This is an important question, and Moroni answers this in Ether 4:1. It says, the Lord commanded the brother of Jared to go down out of the mount from the presence of the Lord and write the things which he had seen. And they were forbidden to come unto the children of men until when? After that he, meaning Christ, should be lifted up upon the cross. And they should not come unto the world until after Christ should show himself unto his people, meaning the Nephites. So the brother of Jared's record was to remain sealed. This is a commandment by the Lord until he came to the Nephites. Make sense so far? Everyone with me? So was this record revealed when Christ came? Well, according to Moroni, Ether 4, he says, and after Christ truly had shown himself unto his people, meaning the Nephites, he commanded that they, meaning the words of the brother of Jared's record, should be made manifest. So that did happen. It was revealed when Christ came, but this event is not recorded in 3rd Nephi. But Moroni says it happened nevertheless, right there, Ether 4:2. It happened. It came forth. Christ came, and he commanded that the brother of Jared's record should be made manifest. So we'll talk more about that later. So what happened to the brother of Jared's record and the interpreters, because remember they were really one object essentially, between being sealed by the brother of Jared and being revealed at Christ's coming? So we don't know all the details. What we do know is that sometime before or after the final Jaredite battle, the prophet Ether recorded the entire Jaredite history onto 24 gold plates. Remember those? These 24 gold plates were later discovered by the Limhi expedition. Many LDS scholars believe the brother Jared's record was contained on the 24 plates of Ether, but I'm going to argue tonight that this is not possible for several reasons. Reason number one, why the brother of Jared's record was not recorded on the 24 plates of Ether, is that Ether, not the brother of Jared, was the sole author of the 24 plates. Moroni tells us this in Ether chapter 1. He says, and now I, Moroni, proceed to give an account of those ancient inhabitants, meaning the Jaredites, who were destroyed by the hand of the Lord. And I take mine account from the 24 plates, which were found by the people of Limhi, which is called the Book of Ether. And he that wrote this record was who? Ether. Ether is the sole author of the 24 plates, not the brother of Jared. Reason number two, why the brother of Jared's record was not on the 24 plates of Ether, is that the brother of Jared's record was sealed, but the 24 plates of gold have no reference of being sealed anywhere. In fact, they were able to open them quite easily and eventually translate them quite easily. Reason number three, the brother of Jared's record was to be kept back until after Christ should show himself unto the Nephites, according to Ether chapter 4. And yet, over 100 years before Christ came, Mosiah translated and caused to be written the records which were on the 24 plates of gold, which had been found by the people of Limhi. So here you have Mosiah translating this record 100 years before Christ came. And yet the brother of Jared's record was to be kept back until that time. Reason number four, Ether knew that the brother of Jared's record was to remain sealed until after Christ appeared in the flesh, and therefore would not have unsealed the brother of Jared's record and copied it over to his 24 plates. That was a commandment, and Ether likely knew about that commandment and did not copy his record over.
It would have been a lot of work.
It would have been, absolutely. That's a lot. I mean, 7,000 years of world history.
And could it have fit on 24 plates?
Yeah, we don't know much what they look like, how compressed they were, stuff like that. But I mean, it obviously did, but we just don't know to what extent. Reason number 5, the sacred nature of the brother Jared's vision required that the record be kept hidden from the knowledge of man. The Lord said, "Thou shalt not suffer these things which ye have seen and heard to go forth unto the world until I glorify my name in the flesh." However, the 24 plates were placed in an easily discoverable location by Ether, and he put them among Jaredite bones and ruins. You remember that? That would have violated that commandment to not let these records go forth unto the world. He placed them in a very easily discoverable location, and they were found later, the 24 plates. Reason number 6, and this is the most important one. The interpreters were to remain with the brother Jared's record at all times. We already covered that. However, the Limhi expedition who found the 24 plates did not find the interpreters. How do we know this? Mosiah II, meaning King Benjamin's son, not King Benjamin's father. I'm going to be referencing both of those Mosiahs, so I'm trying to clarify here with this number down below. But Mosiah the Younger, he already had the brother of Jared's interpreters in Zarahemla prior to the discovery of the 24 plates by the Limhi expedition. So, for example, how do we know this? After receiving the 24 plates from the Limhi expedition, King Limhi asked Ammon if he could translate them. "Then knowest thou anyone that can translate? For I am desired that these records should be translated into our language, or perhaps they will give us a knowledge of a remnant of the people who have been destroyed." Ammon said unto him, "I can assuredly tell thee, O king, of a man that can translate the records, for he has wherewith that he can look and translate all records that are of ancient date. And it is a gift from God. And the things are called interpreters, as I had them. And behold, the king of the people who are in the land of Zarahemla is the man that is commanded to do these things, and it is he who has the high gift from God." So the interpreters, if they were on the 24 plates, had been separated. But I'm arguing that the brother Jared's record was not part of the 24 Jaredite plates. And Mosiah had them when the 24 plates were discovered. So how do we know that Mosiah's interpreters were the same interpreters that the brother Jared had? Is it possible that there were two interpreters, two sets of interpreters? I'm going to argue that there were not, that they were one and the same because of this reason. Mosiah's interpreters were handed down from him, among the Nephites from generation to generation until they were given to Moroni, who buried them with the gold plates. Now, listen to what the Lord said in the Doctrine and Covenants. It said, "The interpreters that Moroni gave to Joseph Smith were the same ones given to the brother Jared." He said, "Behold, I say unto you, Joseph Smith, that you must rely upon my word, which if you do with full purpose of heart, you shall have a view of the plates, and also the Urim and Thummim, which were given to the brother Jared on the mount when he talked with the Lord face to face." So the interpreters that Moroni buried were the same ones that were given to the brother Jared. So there were only one set of interpreters used by the brother Jared, Mosiah, Moroni, Joseph Smith, and everyone in between. Does everyone understand that? Is everyone clear on that? So how did Mosiah the Younger get the interpreters? They were likely given to him from his father, King Benjamin, who likely received them from his father, Mosiah I. The Book of Mormon gives us a strong hint that Mosiah I had them in the Book of Aminadi. It says, "And it came to pass that the people of Zarahemla and of Mosiah did unite together. And it came to pass in the days of Mosiah the elder, there was a large stone brought unto him with engravings on it. Then interpret the engravings by the gift and power of God." So he was likely using this interpreter even before his grandson had it to interpret the 24 plates. So Sidney B. Sperry, LDS scholar, said, "These sacred interpreters were certainly in the possession of the Nephites as early as the days of Elder Mosiah, who must have used them in translating engravings on a large stone which had been brought to him." So How did Mosiah the elder get the interpreters? This has been by far the biggest mystery in the entire Book of Mormon, in my opinion. Until now, I think we've kind of figured out how he got them. But before we attempt to answer this question, I have to point out one other important detail. And that is, if Mosiah the elder had the interpreters, this also means he had the brother of Jared's sealed record too. Remember, they were to remain together at all times, sealed them up together. So he had them both, I'm going to argue. So if Mosiah the elder and King Benjamin had the interpreters, and they also had the brother of Jared's sealed record. And this is confirmed by Moroni. Listen to what he said in Ether 4. And the Lord commanded the brother of Jared to go down out of the mount from the presence of the Lord and write the things which he had seen. And they were forbidden to come unto the children of men until after he should be lifted up upon the cross. And for this cause did King Benjamin keep them, meaning the sealed record. So Moroni said in Ether 4:1 that King Benjamin had the interpreters. Now, your current Book of Mormon does not say King Benjamin here. It says King Mosiah. Now, the original printer's manuscript of the Book of Mormon said King Benjamin, so I've changed it here. It was printed on the first edition of the Book of Mormon as King Benjamin. However, after Joseph Smith died, and when they did some revisions in the Book of Mormon, Orson Pratt assumed that the brother of Jared's record was on the 24 plates of ether. And so if that were to be true, then he would not have gotten the records. King Benjamin would never have gotten the brother of Jared's records. It would have had to have gone to his son, King Mosiah, because that's who the 24 plates were given to. However, Joseph Smith originally translated King Benjamin. There was no apparent contradiction. Orson Pratt assumed that because, the record was, brother Jared's record was probably on the 24 plates, that this was an apparent contradiction, so it was changed. But I'm arguing tonight that there was no need to change this, and that it was correct the way it was written. Does that make sense? Did I confuse anyone on that?
So you're saying that the Book of Mormon, as it's written right now, with King Mosiah stated in that verse, that it is incorrect.
I am, yeah. It was originally King Benjamin, and it was changed because Mosiah got the 24 plates, remember? And so if Moroni is saying here that King Benjamin had the brother of Jared's record, well, that wouldn't line up with what Orson Pratt thought. However, if the brother of Jared's record was completely separate from the 24 plates, there's no reason to change this. That makes sense? Okay, so this verse clearly states that King Benjamin had the brother of Jared's record. And we also know that he had the interpreters and his father had the interpreters in the record. So we're going to try and figure out how they got it. So where did Mosiah the elder get the brother of Jared's record and interpreters? Our current Book of Mormon does not say, and I put current in parentheses because this information was likely contained in the lost 116 pages of the Book of Mormon.
Yeah.
So just to recap here, lost 116 pages. This record, the 116 pages, do not just cover the book of Lehi. That's a misconception that we in the church have fallen victim to. It contained a lot more than just the book of Lehi, or just that it contained more than just the story of Lehi. Rather, the lost manuscript contained around 470 years of Book of Mormon history, if you can believe that. It covered from 600 BC to about 130 BC in the middle of King Benjamin's reign.
Hey,
That's
Rick,
a lot of time.
can I interrupt and ask a question?
Yeah.
What was on the stone that Coriantumr brought when he
That-
stumbled on the Mulekites?
That was a record of the Jaredites as well. But it wasn't, part of the 24 plates, and it wasn't part of Brother Jared's record. It was just a third record. People in that, yeah, they wrote on stone.
Yeah, and that was the stone, yeah.
Yeah, it was a stone. So
Okay,
yeah, that's
thank you.
completely different. So there's 3 different Jaredite records so far that we're discussing here.
Okay.
And we'll look for those 116 pages while we're there as well.
Yeah, please do. Please do. That would be
Go
exciting.
digging, I'm not, I won't.
That's on Lori's to-do list, not
No,
mine.
it's not.
So the point is, we have a lot of
Dave,
history.
if you find them, I'll pay you $100.
Yeah, I'll chip in too.
You're so generous, Steve.
Okay, so there's a lot of information that was missing in this 116 pages. It's not just the story of Lehi and Nephi. It covers 470 years. I want to introduce you to a book and an author named Don Bradley. Has anyone heard of this book or this author?
Yeah.
Yeah. Have you read it, Dennis?
Yeah, it's really good.
Oh, good. So Don Bradley, he actually he knows Ron. He interned for Ron Esplin with the Joseph Smith papers. And so Ron speaks highly of him. And I know Rod Schmidt has read a little bit of this book. I don't know if he finished it or not, but I was hoping he'd be here to tell us about it. But well, Dennis, so the next little bit, I'm going to kind of talk about this book. You'll probably be pretty familiar with this, but so Bradley in this book took it upon himself to try and recreate the stories and the contents in the last 116 pages. So how did he do that? Well, he had several methods. Number one, many people knew what was in the lost manuscript. So for example, Joseph Smith translated it, so he obviously knew what was in there. Joseph Smith shared much of its contents with his family members and others, so they knew what was in there. Martin Harris was the scribe, so he shared much of his contents with his friends and family, and he knew what was in it. So there's a lot of people that were kind of privy to the information contained in the 116 pages. How else did he reconstruct it? Well, the Book of Mormon has several references to the 116 pages. Some are obvious and some not so obvious. We'll talk about some of these here in a minute, but that's a method we can use to help us. Another method is studying the revelations that were given to Joseph Smith during the translation of the 116 pages. So specifically section 3 and also section 5 and 10. And also teachings from the prophet during this time period may contain some information about the contents as well. And then I want to specifically talk about this method of reconstructing the contents. So there were a couple historical documents from the 19th century, specifically an 1830 interview with Joseph Smith Sr. and a man named Fayette Lapham. I want you guys to remember that name. He was a newspaper reporter, and he interviewed Joseph Smith Sr., and he gave him many details regarding the events that were found in the lost manuscript, 116 pages. And this interview was later published in a historical magazine in 1870. And so we can draw some information on this interview, which is kind of exciting. So Bradley in this book took each of these resources and kind of pieced together a basic outline of what was likely contained in the last 116 pages. So tonight we're mainly interested in how Mosiah the elder gained possession of the brother Jared's sealed record and interpreters. But I thought a brief synopsis of Don Bradley's other conclusions may also be of some interest to you guys as well. So let me kind of go over some of the highlights. So what was in the 116 pages? So according to this Lapham interview, Joseph Smith Sr. told him that when Nephi arrived in the city of Jerusalem, it was night, and he found the citizens having been having a great feast. They're all drunk. So I underline this great feast, which is not mentioned in the Book of Mormon. And usually these feasts are associated with, there's 7 prophetic feasts that the Lord wanted the children of Israel to observe and things. And Bradley, through this statement and others, kind of concluded that Passover was probably the best candidate, probably the best fit for this great feast. So it's possible that Nephi entered Jerusalem the night of Passover. That may very well be the case. And you guys can read the book to read about his arguments on why, but worth mentioning here. Okay, the sword of Laban. So we already know about the brass plates, that they originated with Joseph in Egypt. The Book of Mormon tells us that. But the lost manuscript also informs us that the sword of Laban was made by Joseph in Egypt as well. According to Francis Bishop, a longtime friend and confidant of Martin Harris, and someone who was known to have inquired of Martin Harris for information pertaining to the lost pages, said this: "The history of the sword is as follows. It was caused to be made by Joseph of old in Egypt, by the direction of God, and was in the hand of Joshua when he led the house of Israel into the land of Canaan. After him, it came down in the lineage of Joseph to Laban, from whom it was taken by Nephi." So someone who was very close to Martin Harris kind of gave us this information, which is not found in the Book of Mormon, leads us to believe that it was on the 116 pages, made by Joseph in Egypt, and given to, it was in the hands of Joshua when he came across into Canaan, which is interesting. So that's a likelihood.
Hey,
Yeah,
Rick,
go ahead, Dennis.
there's one word that you use in there, that the brass plates originated with Joseph. Is that?
Right, and what I mean by that is he probably started them. They were added to, throughout history, and I mean Jeremiah's words are in there, so they were up to date in 600 BC. Is that what you're referring to?
Well, I'm just wondering if you're suggesting that Joseph was the first compiling author of what was in there, or whether he was one of a series that started before him.
Well, let's read verse 14 and 16 here. It said, "It came to pass that my father Lehi also found upon the plates of brass the genealogy of his fathers, wherefore he knew that he was a descendant of Joseph, who was sold into Egypt, and who was preserved by the hand of the Lord."
Certainly, Joseph's story, history, genealogy was included. I'm just wondering if you're taking.
So, and maybe I have this reference here, and maybe I should have referenced Bradley's work, but I think there's more references to brass plates originating with Joseph in Egypt as well, outside of that Book of Mormon reference, which may not be as specific. So you may be right, and maybe I can dig that up and see if that is the case or not. But as I understand it now, I think that he was the person that kind of originated that record. But I mean, you've studied the brass plates more than we have. I mean, you presented on it a couple of weeks ago. Is that a likelihood, or is that, what do you think?
Well, it seems that the earliest indication we have of the source or of the content of the brass plates is that story of Joseph and the prophecies of Joseph. Let's put it that way. The prophecies of Joseph are included in there. And I haven't heard, at least I haven't stumbled across anybody who suggests that that's the originating author of the brass plates. I mean, it could be, but so.
Yeah, and I
It's just
appreciate
when
you
you say
clarifying that.
they were originated with Joseph. Just wondering kind of where that source.
Yeah, let me get back to you on that. I'll see if I can find any references or any arguments why he may have had that. Yeah, I don't know off the top of my head, but I appreciate you clarifying that and helping us get clear on that. So
that does bring out some really interesting things in my mind if it was Joseph who actually originated them. So
interesting. Okay, to be continued there. Another bit of information that may have been in the last 116 pages is regarding Ishmael. So what do we know about Ishmael? Well, the Book of Mormon tells us that he had 5 daughters who married, many of Lehi's sons, and he also had 2 sons who were married at the time of their journey.
And it looks like we have a picture of him as well.
Yeah, that's an actual photograph. Very good.
it's buried with those plates you're going to find, Dave.
Yeah, it's a picture book. That's right. All right. So in the 116 pages, there's a little bit of theory or a hint that Lehi's two daughters married Ishmael's two sons prior to their journey into the wilderness. Whether this is true or not, we don't know, but Elder Eratosthenes said this: the prophet Joseph informed us that the record of Lehi was contained on the 116 pages that were first translated and subsequently stolen, and also said that Ishmael was of the lineage of Ephraim and that his sons married into Lehi's family. Lehi's sons married Ishmael's daughters. We knew that last part, that Lehi's sons married Ishmael's daughters, but the fact that his sons married into Lehi's family is new information that may have been on the 116 pages. And if they were married prior to their journey, then they would have been, family before they left, if that makes sense. So Hugh Nibley kind of picked. Go ahead.
We know that that Ishmael was of the lineage of Ephraim by a comment that the prophet Joseph made in a bar to a guy.
Okay.
And that's where the information comes from, which I find interesting.
I think
Do you know for sure if that's where Eratosthenes got it, or if he had a separate
Probably.
comment?
He doesn't say where he got it.
Well, he says the prophet Joseph informed us here.
Yes.
So
Somebody
Yeah, I
was
don't-
asking him in a bar, and he said, well, Ishmael was of the lineage of Ephraim.
interesting.
Everybody was saying, well, you've said that all of all of Joseph's tribes were represented, but you don't have any record that anybody was from Ephraim. So,
Interesting.
I'm just depicting this conversation. Here, hold my beer. I'm going to tell you
oh
about
my
Ephraim.
dear, exactly. So that's a. I mean, it was kind of an offhand comment, but
Yeah.
that makes sense that some of that information was on the 116 pages, because certainly Joseph knew about it.
My memory tells me that the index in our current scriptures indicates in the header, when you talk about Ishmael, it says that he was of the lineage of Ephraim. So I think it's authoritative enough that it made it into our
authoritative.
indexes.
It came from the prophet Joseph. It's just interesting that it came from the prophet Joseph in a conversation in a bar. That's the interesting part.
That vision's never going to go out of my mind. Here, hold my beer.
I appreciate that, Steve. That's why we invite you, as always. Nuggets like this. Okay, so it is possible. We don't know for sure. I mean, this statement is kind of all we have. But if Lehi's, sons had married into, or excuse me, Ishmael's sons had married into Lehi's family prior to their journey and married some of Nephi's sisters, then it would have made sense. So Hugh Nibley kind of caught on to this and made a pretty informative guess here. He said, the interesting thing is that Nephi takes Ishmael, unlike Zoram, completely for granted, never explaining who he is or how he fits into the picture. The act of sinning for him seems to be the most natural thing in the world, as does the marriage of his daughters with Lehi's sons. Since it has ever been the custom among the desert people, it is hard to avoid the impression that Lehi and Ishmael were related. So, I mean, there's a possibility there. But moving on. So, according to this Lapham interview, Joseph Smith Sr. mentioned to him that Lehi had constructed a tabernacle in the wilderness after they left Jerusalem. He said this: after Nephi obtained the brass plates, the family moved on for several days when they were directed to stop, erect a tabernacle wherein they could go and inquire whenever they became bewildered or at a loss what to do. So that's new information, may have happened. Nephi told us that Lehi was observing the law of Moses, so it would make sense. I mean, he would have to have a required sanctuary for ritual observances to do that. So there's some good possibility and a little bit more stronger evidence that this actually did happen. So here's just a rough sketch of Lehi's likely journey. This first picture here, Jerusalem's at the top of the screen, and they traveled 3 days to the borders of the Red Sea. This is where they camped for probably several months. And then when they were ready to begin their journey again, traveled in a southeast direction. They were probably following what was called the Frankincense Trail, all the way down until they got past Nahom, at which point the Liahona told them to turn due east and travel across this really bitter desert. I mean, it's just nothing out there, no water, no animals, I mean, it's just desert. And this second picture, you can see a satellite image of just how barren this land is, except for this little green patch there along the coast, which is represented in this bottom picture, which is the likely spot of Bountiful. I mean, all the descriptions that Nephi gives us of Bountiful fits this area really, really well. And so this is probably where they built their boat and set sail from. But the point of this is some LDS archaeologists several years ago were excavating this area, researching it, and they came across this structure which they felt was a temple-like structure, patterned after Israelites' temple and tabernacle, etc. So if Lehi and Nephi were here, and I mean, it makes sense. I mean, we know that Lehi built an altar. The Book of Mormon tells us that. We know that Nephi built a temple when they got to the New World. So it only makes sense that they would have a tabernacle along their route, and then when they get to Bountiful, maybe build a little bit more permanent structure. And maybe this is it right here. We don't know for sure. But all the evidence seems to indicate that there may be some truth to that claim that Lehi was instructed to build a tabernacle. What else was contained? Well, according to this interview, Lapham interview, the Americas were populated when Lehi and Nephi arrived. It says, after sailing a long time, they came to a land. When they first beheld this country, they sent out spies to see what manner of country it was, who reported that the country appeared to have been settled by a very large race of men and had been, to all appearances, a very rich agricultural and manufacturing nation. So the Book of Mormon itself is pretty silent on if there were people in the Americas prior to Nephi and Lehi's arrival. And in fact, its silence has been a big criticism to a lot of opponents of the church, and there's been a lot of material written about that, about DNA and stuff. I don't want to get into that, but there is some evidence in the Book of Mormon, what I call evidence of others in the Book of Mormon prior to their arrival or outside of the families that came. And those are some scriptures, if you want to look it up, where they do mention others that appear to be outside of the family, the direct family of this group of people that came. And then down here, if you want to look any of these up, these are all LDS scholars researching the evidence of others in the Americas when Lehi and Nephi arrived. So if you want to look up some of those, but all that to say, if the last 116 pages mentioned a large race of men and a large agricultural and manufacturing people when they arrived, then a lot of those DNA stuff just kind of goes along the wayside and there's not much merit to it. But okay, once in the Americas, Nephi eventually fled from his brothers. He was warned in a dream, if you remember. And he took the sacred relics with him, brass plates, his family records, the sword of Laban, and the Liahona, and settled in the land of Nephi. Now, in order to understand kind of the remainder of my presentation, I just wanted to take a second and introduce you to what I'll call Mormon's map here. And this is kind of how the Book of Mormon describes the geography and landscapes of the Book of Mormon lands. So let me just take you through this here. So the Book of Mormon, in Alma 22 says that they landed on the west coast, and that was where their land of first inheritance was. And then when Nephi was warned in a dream to flee from his brothers, they fled over to the land which they settled called Nephi. And this is where they were for hundreds of years, 300 years or so, which we don't have record of in their last 116 pages contain this information, but we just don't know a lot of what went on here until Mosiah the elder was called to be a prophet and led a group of people out of the land of Nephi to the land of Zarahemla, which is up here. So the main landmark the Book of Mormon describes as separating the Nephites up north and the Lamanites down south is what Mormon calls a narrow strip of wilderness, which ran from the sea west to the sea east and touched both coasts. I believe that to be mountainous area, rough terrain. You know, a lot of people got lost when they tried to cross this area. So it's pretty difficult to navigate. The River Sidon started in this area, and we know rivers start up high in mountains. So this is probably a mountainous area that separated the land of the Lamanites from Nephites. So we have Zarahemla up here, Bountiful up north a little bit. Then up here we have the land of desolation, which is where the Jaredites were. And the landmark that separated the Jaredites from the Nephites was what Mormon called a narrow neck of land. And so here that's represented here. So if you guys can kind of just get this mental picture in your brain of what the geography of the Book of Mormon looked like, maybe one day we can try and put this on a physical map, but tonight I don't want to do that. I just want to, this is how Mormon describes the layout of the Book of Mormon. And so I'm going to talk a little bit about some of the events that happened during the last 160 pages, but it's good to kind of understand where we are in relation to everything else. Any questions there so far? Are we good? Or so good. Okay. So once Nephi fled the land of first inheritance, settled in Nephi, he built a temple, we know, after the manner of Solomon. And so that was built in the land of Nephi. Now, Bradley in his book argues that since the Nephites did not have the same sacred temple relics that the Israelites had in their temple, that replacement relics were used as substitutes. And I find that argument really interesting. And I kind of agree that that may have likely been the scenario. So for example, the 10 Commandments that was in the Ark of the Covenant may have been replicated by the brass plates that also is scripture from the Lord. Goliath's sword was in the tabernacle, at least for a time, which would have been kind of represented by the sword of Laban. The pot of manna that was in the Ark of the Covenant was likely represented by the Liahona. You know, it's interesting that both the pot of manna, or excuse me, the manna and the Liahona were found in the morning, and they were both called a small round thing, which is interesting. And both were a source of food. Obviously, the Liahona leading Nephi's party to get food and things. Brazen serpent also represented by the Liahona. You know, if you look to the brazen serpent and live, remember that story in Numbers. And also Alma comparing the Liahona that we must look to Christ and live like Nephi looked to the Liahona, etc. And then the Urim and Thummim and breastplate that the old high priest had in the Old Testament would eventually be replaced with the brother of Jared's interpreters and breastplate. So there's some connection there. And I got to, real quick. So, and the hill Kimorah as a temple. So I put this sign here. It is interesting to note that once these sacred temple relics were removed from their Nephite temple setting for good, they were deposited into the hill Kimorah, which acted like a temple to temporarily house the sacred Nephite temple relics. So for example, we know the phrase, the mountain of the Lord's house, and mountains and temples are often used interchangeably and things. Martin Harris referred to the stone box that Joseph Smith recovered these items in as an ark, which is interesting, kind of mimicking the Ark of the Covenant. And Joseph Smith, acting as the high priest, could only access these items under angelic permission and only once per year. It's just like the Day of Atonement when the high priest could only go into the temple once a year to the Ark of the Covenant. And I got to give a shout out to my guy Steve here. I scoured the internet for a picture of you, Steve. That was the only one I could come up with. But Steve picked up on this theme in his book. And when I read it a couple years ago, this stood out to me and I thought it was really cool. And I think it fits here with what we're talking about. So Steve in his book said, Mormon versus Mosaic relics have a delightfully inverse nature. The Ark of the Covenant was a golden reliquary covered with gold leaf and topped with a golden lid. But its principal purpose was to hold its most sacred relic, the Word of God carved in stone. Joseph reliquary was made of stone, the principal purpose of which was to hold safe its most sacred relic, the Word of God engraved on plates of gold. So an inverse relationship, stone box, gold, stone tablets in a gold box and gold plates in a stone box. And in fact, Bradley picked up on this as well, but I have to give credit to Brother Newton who found it first, but Bradley mentioned something similar in his. He said, Joseph Smith described the box in which he found the Nephite relics as a stone box of simple construction held together by a kind of cement. With the gold plates contained wherewith, it would have poetically inverted the pattern of the biblical ark. In place of stone tablets in a gold ark, the Nephite sacred cachet consisted of golden tablets in an ark of stone. So, Steve, anything you want to add to that? I know you probably have something to say, right?
Well, I just and I really like the idea. We do know that David's sword, which was taken from Goliath, with which he chopped off Goliath's head, was kept.
Yes.
With the was kept obviously after the time of David or at the time of David. And in fact, as he was fleeing Saul, he came and got the sword because he left in such a hurry. He didn't have a sword. And so when the priest gave him that sword, and when Saul found out about it, he massacred all of the priests in the city of Nob, which was the holy city at the time. And so there's a I mean, there's a lot of history, ugly and amazing, that goes with these swords that were kept with that were at one time were kept with in these reliquary, these inverse reliquaries, which I find to be very interesting.
Yeah, I appreciate that. So why is this important? Because according to the last 116 pages, the Nephites came very close to losing control of their temple and their sacred temple relics on more than one occasion. So how do we know this? Okay, so the Book of Mormon, remember I told you, has some references to what was in the last 116 pages. Two of them come in Omni and Jerem here. And Omni mentions that in 279 BC, this is several years before Mosiah left for Zarahemla, he said the more wicked part of the Nephites in the land of Nephi were destroyed. And Jerem said that there were several prophets that warned the Nephites of this destruction. And we just don't know much about them. However, according to Bradley in his book, he gives us a really strong candidate for a prophet for whom this burden of warning the Nephites fell, and that was a man called Aminadi. I don't know if you guys remember his name from the Book of Mormon, but let's talk about Aminadi because he was likely one of the prophets that prophesied of destruction in 279 BC. So who was Aminadi? If you remember, Aminadi was an ancestor of Amulek, who's at least 4 generations removed. Amulek said this to the people of Ammonihah: I am Amulek, I am the son of Gedonah, who was the son of Ishmael, who was the descendant of Aminadi. That's who we're talking about. And it was that same Aminadi who interpreted the writing which was upon the wall of the temple, which was written by the finger of God. And Aminadi was a descendant of Nephi. So you guys remember this story, and I'm sure when you read the Book of Mormon for the first time, you said, huh? When did this happen? What is this referencing? We have no idea. I mean, is this the same as when I first read it in high school? I was like, I remember writing on the wall of the temple, but I thought that was the Old Testament. Is this what it's referring to? Like, I couldn't figure out what story this was and what it meant, and it was just kind of put there out of the blue. And anyone have the same experience as me? I'm sure, right? So who was this Aminadi? So the point I want to make here is that Mormon rarely introduce a character, a location, a story, etc., without first giving us some background. So when he fails to do this, it is a clue that the backstory may have been included in the lost manuscripts. And this is likely the case with Aminadi. So let's piece this story together. So several LDS scholars have placed Aminadi in the city of Nephi, near the Nephite temple, prior to this 279 BC destruction, and prior to Mosiah's exodus from Zarahemla. So for example, George Reynolds wrote, Aminadi must have been in the land of Nephi before the Nephites migrated to Zarahemla, as he was at least 4 generations separated from Amulek. That would put him right at the perfect time, 4+ generations to be located there. Brent Gardner said, Aminadi interpreted the writing on the wall before Mosiah led his people out of the city of Nephi. So it's probably a story that he interpreted this writing on the wall, and which was a warning of the destruction in the land of Nephi. So Aminadi was probably one of these prophets that Jerem referenced that warned the Nephites of this destruction, and he did so likely by interpreting the writing which was on the wall of Nephite's temple. So there's probably a warning of some sort, and Aminadi was the one that interpreted it for everyone. And Mormon just assumed we knew all about this story, probably because he told us all about it in the last 116 pages. I hope that's helpful in clearing that up. And if this incident is anything like the incident in Daniel 5 that I was referencing a minute ago, then the writing that Aminadi interpreted was likely a warning of judgments to come unless there was repentance. So something similar probably happened in the temple of Nephi, and the Lord was warning them to repent, and Aminadi interpreted that as a prophet for the people. But ultimately, they did not repent. They didn't listen to his warnings, and in 279 BC, Aminadi tells us that the more wicked part of the Nephites were destroyed. However, this story of Aminadi remained very well known, even 4+ generations later, and even among the non-religious people of Ammonihah. So this must have been an event that was worth talking about, even generations later, and among the people that weren't even religious. So after this destruction, after the more wicked parts of the Nephites were destroyed, about 80 years after this, around 200 BC, many Nephites apostatized again. And this time it was Mosiah the elder who was called to lead an exodus from the land of Nephi to Zarahemla. We know that from Aminadi chapter 1. And here's the map showing the route that they would have gone here. Mosiah the elder was most likely not a king in the land of Nephi. I really want to stress that. Before he left, he was probably not the king. He was only a prophet. It was not until he arrived in Zarahemla that he was made king, according to the book of Aminadi. So we know that the Nephite king, let me read this bullet point first. The Nephite king at the time of Mosiah's exodus was likely in apostasy. He was probably not among the group who hearkened unto the voice of the Lord and left with Mosiah to the land of Nephi, or left from the land of Nephi. If he was, he would have likely remained king in Zarahemla, not Mosiah the first. Follow? Now, the large plates of Nephi and likely the sacred relics, brass plates, Liahona, were passed down through the kings, not the prophets. And Dennis did a really good job explaining this to us several months ago when he talked about the brass plates. So Mosiah probably did not have access to the large plates or the Nephite temple relics while he was in the land of Nephi. Instead, they were likely in the Nephite temple under control of an apostate king. So Mosiah the first, he did retrieve them somehow because he brought them with him to Zarahemla. And we just don't know the story. We don't know how he got them. But it probably, I don't know, did it involve a miracle? Like when Nephi retrieved brass plates during his exodus? No doubt the last 116 pages told the story. So a little bit of speculation there, but I think there's some merit to some of those things. Mosiah the elder, for his exodus, had the Liahona. And this is according to the Lapham interview, but it's also hinted at in Omni, and I'll read Lapham's account in a minute. But I wanted to read the statement in Omni too, because I think it hints at the Liahona. Mosiah, being warned of the Lord that he should flee out of the land of Nephi, and as many as would hearken unto the voice of the Lord departed out of the land into the wilderness. And they were led by the power of his arm through the wilderness until they came down to the land which is called the land of Zarahemla. So here's a reference which I believe is maybe referencing the Liahona, guiding them where to go. And I'll read Lapham's account of that in a minute. So Mosiah the elder, using the Liahona, was led not straight to Zarahemla. I want you guys to remember this. He was first led to a hill north of the land of Shiloh on his way to Zarahemla. That's where he was led to. How do we know this? It was referenced by Mormon much later in his record. Let me read this to you. So if you remember, King Noah, his father Zeniff, came down from Zarahemla, and they wanted to go back to where Mosiah came from, near the temple. And so they arrived there, and by the time King Noah took over, Mormon says that King Noah caused that many buildings should be built in the land of Shiloh. He caused a great tower to be built on the hill north of the land of Shiloh, which hill had been a resort for the children of Nephi at the time they fled out of the land. So when did this happen? We don't have a record of this outside. I mean, King Mosiah's Exodus is the only event that fits this missing story. So Mormon probably told all about this hill that King Mosiah went to, and it was a place of refuge at the time they fled. He just references back to here when he's talking about Noah. Does that make sense?
So how many resorts did they build in those days?
Well, we don't, I mean, Noah kind of rebuilt the temple, or excuse me, his father. They rebuilt many buildings. So it probably was destroyed as part of Mosiah's Exodus out, and they probably destroyed a lot of it, but they came back and rebuilt the temple, rebuilt many buildings, and King Noah built a tower on the hill that Mormon's referring to here. And that hill was a place of safety. Yeah.
So would you assume resort kind of means big town with lots of stuff? Is that what?
No, I mean a place of protection, a place to hide. Yeah,
okay.
a place to escape the dangers that were going on in the land of Nephi.
So more towers and
A fortress, more like, probably.
more like
Yeah.
what?
A fortress with a tower.
Fortresses and stuff.
Yeah.
Okay.
You could see what was happening.
Uh-huh.
So,
Okay.
so this leads us to believe that Mosiah, when he left the land of Nephi, likely stopped at this hill near the land of Shiloh for a time to hide out, to gather themselves before they went to Zarahemla. Now, according to the Lapham interview, once at the hill near Shiloh, Mosiah built a tabernacle. And at this point, Mosiah and his followers were then guided by the Liahona through the brother of Jared's interpreters, which were likely buried somewhere at this hill. This is what he says. They, meaning Mosiah and his party, also found something of which they did not know the use. But when they went into the tabernacle, a voice said, "What have you got in your hand there?" They replied that they did not know, but had come to inquire. When the voice said, "Put it on your face, and put your face in a skin, and you will see what it is." They did so and could see everything of the past, present, and future, and it was the same spectacles that Joseph found with the gold plates. The gold ball, meaning the Liahona, stopped here and ceased to direct them any further. So the Liahona led them to this hill where they found the interpreters buried somewhere. And at which point the Liahona stopped working at this point. Bradley made an interesting observation, which I'll read here. Lapham's account explains why the Liahona, which guided travels during the lost manuscript period, is never used again in Mormon's abridgment and seems to instead be handed down as a relic of the past. By the time of Mosiah II's reign, it seemed that it was no longer functioning. Thus, when his people needed to find the land of Nephi, they knew not the course they should travel in the wilderness. Therefore, they wandered many days in the wilderness. If the Nephites still possessed the directors, why were they without direction? Lapham offers an answer to this question. The Liahona stopped working. After Mosiah the elder acquired the interpreters, presented as a superior instrument, or a gift which is greater no man can have, the inferior Liahona was no longer needed. So if Mosiah found the brother Jared's interpreters at the hill near Shiloh, then he also found the brother Jared's sealed record there as well, because these two were to remain together at all times. This would explain why Mosiah II already had the interpreters when the Limhi expedition found the 24 plates of ether. This was long before that. Does that make sense? Does everyone follow?
Yep.
So how did the brother of Jared's sealed record and interpreters end up at the hill Shiloh? We don't know, but it is possible that Ether buried them there. The hill Shiloh was within walking distance from the land northward. A similar journey was made by the Limhi expedition. And near the end of his life, Ether wrote, "Whether the Lord will that I be translated, or that I suffer the will of the Lord in the flesh, it mattereth not." So in other words, he doesn't know if he has unfinished business or not, is the way it sounds like. And this is a really interesting reference too. The brother of Jared's record was buried twice, according to the Book of Mormon. Once by Moroni with the gold plates, and once by someone else, referenced by Moroni. It says in Ether chapter 4, verse 3, "Therefore I, Moroni, am commanded that I should hide them up again in the earth." They were buried, and brother of Jared's record was buried in the earth once prior to Moroni getting them. So all of this to say, Ether most likely placed the 24 plates way up here in the land of desolation, where they could be easily discovered, and then traveled southward to the land of Nephi, where he was instructed to bury them at the hill near Shiloh. Mosiah was led to that hill on the way to Zarahemla, found them, and that's how they got the record and interpreters. So to recap, the brother of Jared's sealed record and interpreters, they originated with the brother of Jared. They were passed down from the brother of Jared to Ether. They were buried at the hill near Shiloh by Ether. Mosiah the first was led to them by the Liahona. Mosiah the first took them to Zarahemla and used the interpreters to interpret the large stone. They were handed down to King Benjamin, who passed them on to his son Mosiah II, who used them to interpret the 24 plates of ether. And the brother of Jared's record was eventually translated with the interpreters. I'll talk about that here in a sec. And they were then passed down among Nephite prophets until Moroni got them. And he buried them both, the gold plates and the interpreters. He didn't bury the brother of Jared's original record, but the translated copy with the plates and the interpreters, and then they were given to Joseph Smith. So that's kind of the line of what we think happened to the interpreters after their, and the record after the brother of Jared. So, was the brother of Jared's record ever unsealed? So think back to the start when it was, this needs to remain sealed until Christ comes. But yes, the record was unsealed, but we are unsure as to exactly when. But there are at least two possibilities. Possibility one is that King Benjamin, or maybe even his father, King Mosiah, not knowing about the commandment that the record was to remain sealed until Christ came. Remember, this is a completely different nation. May have translated the sealed record using the interpreters, but upon learning of this commandment that they should be kept back, they held back the interpretation from the Nephites until Christ came. And there's this reference in Ether 4:1 that suggests that this may have been the case. Mormon says, and for this cause did King Benjamin keep them, meaning the record of the brother of Jared, that they should not come unto the world until after Christ should show himself unto this people. So is Moroni talking about the translated copy or the original? We don't know. But here's that verse that was changed from Mosiah to King Benjamin. And now it makes sense why King Benjamin could have the interpreters and it didn't need to be changed to King Mosiah here. But King Benjamin did keep the brother Jared's record, and he did not give them to the Nephites until after Christ should show himself unto the people. Possibility number 2. If King Mosiah and or King Benjamin did know about the commandment that the plates were to remain sealed until Christ came, which would have maybe been through revelation through the interpreters, then they would have kept them sealed until Christ came. And so there's another hint here that suggests that this may be possible. Ether chapter 4. And after Christ truly had shown himself unto his people, he commanded that they, meaning the brother Jared's record, should be made manifest. So that event did happen at the time of Christ. The record was made manifest. We just don't know if it was translated at that time or if it was translated back with King Mosiah and or King Benjamin. If the record was unsealed and translated at the time of Christ, it would have likely been Nephi, the prophet at the time of Christ, who would have translated. But either way, from at least this point on, when Christ came, in Nephite history, there would be 2 copies of the brother Jared's vision, the original and the translation. LDS scholar Valentine Arts wrote, from at least the time of Nephi, AD 35, there were 2 copies of the record of the great vision of the brother Jared, the original in a language that cannot be read, and the interpretation thereof in the Nephite language. And each of these 2 copies would have been passed down among the Nephites until they fell into the hands of Moroni. Once Moroni received them, he probably copied the translated record onto the gold plates, making a 3rd copy. And then here we have Moroni, behold, I, Moroni, have written upon the gold plates the very things which your brother Jared saw. Wherefore the Lord has commanded me to write them, and I have written them. And he commanded me that I should seal them up. So the record is with the gold plates. And eventually the brother, Joseph Smith eventually received Moroni's sealed record, but was not authorized to translate that portion of the gold plates that were sealed. Once they were sealed by Moroni, it has not been opened or read by anyone since. So in closing here, a couple more questions. When will the sealed portion be unsealed? We don't know. All we know is from 2 Nephi 27:8, which says, wherefore the things which are sealed, and this is Nephi talking about this record of the sealed portion, shall not be delivered in the day of wickedness and abomination of the people. So that's the only clue we have as to when we will get to read it. It's not going to be during the day of wickedness. So does this mean we'll get it during the millennium when we as a church are living Shoah and we get it at that time? Does it mean during the millennium when the whole world is not being wicked? We just don't know. And in fact, there's another scripture that Nephi says that he's speaking of the millennium. He says, the earth shall be full of the knowledge of the Lord, and there's nothing which is secret save it shall be revealed, and there's nothing which is sealed upon the earth shall it be loosed. So is he referring to the sealed portion of the Book of Mormon here, where he's talking about the millennium, where it will be loosed here at that time? We don't know. And it may be the case where, we get it in Zion or, somewhere around that time, and it goes forth to the rest of the world after the millennium, something like that. But we just don't know outside of that one hint. And then the last thing I want to mention, I just want to tell you a quick story of when I was younger in high school. I went to an education week, BYU. It was a youth class. Most of us there were youth. And the presenter was telling us all about the sealed portion of the Book of Mormon and how exciting it was, and what was in it. And then he asked, "How many of you want to read this record?" And we all raised our hand. And he said, "Okay, keep your hands in the air if you've already read the Book of Mormon from cover to cover, our current Book of Mormon." And most of our hands, including mine, went down. And that had always stuck with me, that, we won't get more scripture until we take advantage of what we have currently. And ever since that day, I've tried to not take the Book of Mormon for granted. And I'm sure many of you are in the same category, that you love that book, and we read it and we study it. But at the end of the day, we're not going to get any more until we appreciate and understand the scriptures that we do have. So until that time, we'll just be patient, waiting for the sealed portion to be revealed, and be content with the scriptures that we do have. So anyway, I leave that with you in the name of Jesus Christ. Amen.
Thank you very much, Rick.
Yep.
Bravo.
Thank you. Yes, that was great.
Thank you.
A really good presentation. Anybody have any questions for him?